The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during today's hearing. Good afternoon. At our last hearing, we told the story of a scheme driven by Donald Trump to pressure former Vice President Mike Pence to illegally overturn the election results. We showed that when the pressure campaign failed and Mike Pence fulfilled his constitutional obligation, Donald Trump turned a violent mob loose on him. We showed that the mob came within roughly 40 feet of the Vice President. Today, we'll show that what happened to Mike Pence wasn't an isolated part of Donald Trump's scheme to overturn the election. In fact, pressuring public servants into betraying their oaths was a fundamental part of the playbook. And a handful of election officials in several key states stood between Donald Trump and the upending of American democracy. As we begin today, it's important to remember when we count the votes for president, we count the votes state by state. For the most part, the candidates who win the popular vote in a state wins all the state's electoral college votes. And whoever wins a majority of the electoral college votes wins the presidency. So when Donald Trump tried to overturn the election results, he focused on just a few states. He wanted officials at the local and state level to say the vote was tainted by widespread fraud and throw out the results, even though, as we showed last week, there wasn't any voter fraud that could have overturned the election results. And like Mike Pence, these public servants wouldn't go along with Donald Trump's scheme. And when they wouldn't embrace the big lie and substitute the will of the voters with Donald Trump's will to remain in power, Donald Trump worked to ensure they faced the consequences, threats to people's livelihood and lives, threats of violence that Donald Trump knew about and amplified. Second, the lie hasn't gone away. It's corrupting our democratic institutions. People who believe that lie are now seeking positions of public trust. And as seen in New Mexico, their oath to be to the people they serve will take a back seat to their commitment to the big lie. If that happens, who will make sure our institutions don't break under the pressure? We won't have close calls. We'll have a catastrophe. My distinguished colleague from California, Mr. Schiff, will present much of the Select Committee's finding on this matter. First, I'm pleased to recognize our Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statement she'd care to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today, we will begin examining President Trump's effort to overturn the election by exerting pressure on state officials and state legislatures. Donald Trump had a direct and personal role in this effort, as did Rudy Giuliani, as did John Eastman. In other words, the same people who were attempting to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to reject electoral votes illegally were also simultaneously working to reverse the outcome of the 2020 election at the state level. Each of these efforts to overturn the election is independently serious. Each deserves attention both by Congress and by our Department of Justice. But as the federal court has already indicated, these efforts were also part of a broader plan. And all of this was done in preparation for January 6th.
On November 3rd, 2020, Donald Trump ran for re-election to the office of the presidency, and he lost. His opponent, Joe Biden, finished ahead in the key battleground states of Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and elsewhere. Nevertheless, and for the first time in history, the losing presidential candidate fought to hold on to power. As we have seen in previous hearings, he did so through a variety of means. On Election Day, he sought to stop the counting of the vote, knowing that the millions of absentee ballots elections officials would be counting on Election Day and thereafter would run strongly against him and deliver a victory to Joe Biden. Next, and when he could not stop the counting, he tried to stop state legislatures and governors from certifying the results of the election. He went to court and filed dozens of frivolous lawsuits, making unsubstantiated claims of fraud. When that too failed, he mounted a pressure campaign directed at individual state legislators to try to get them to go back into session and either declare him the winner, decertify Joe Biden as the winner, or send two slates of electors to Congress, one for Biden and one for him, and pressure Vice President Pence to choose him as the winner. But the state legislatures wouldn't go along with this scheme, and neither would the vice president. None of the legislatures agreed to go back into special session and declare him the winner. No legitimate state authority in the states Donald Trump lost would agree to appoint fake Trump electors and send them to Congress. But this didn't stop the Trump campaign either. They assembled groups of individuals in key battleground states and got them to call themselves electors, created phony certificates associated with these fake electors, and then transmitted these certificates to Washington and to the Congress to be counted during the joint session of Congress on January 6th. None of this worked. But according to Federal District Judge David Carter, former President Trump and others likely violated multiple federal laws by engaging in this scheme, including conspiracy to defraud the United States. You will hear evidence of the former president and his top advisors' direct involvement in key elements of this plot, or what Judge Carter called a coup in search of a legal theory. For as the judge explained, President Trump's pressure campaign to stop the electoral count did not end with Vice President Pence. It targeted every tier of federal and state elected officials. Convincing state legislatures, he said, to certify competing electors was essential to stop the count and ensure President Trump's re-election. As we have seen in our prior hearings, running through this scheme was a big lie that the election was plagued with massive fraud and somehow stolen. You'll remember what the president's own Attorney General, Bill Barr, said he told the president about these claims of massive fraud affecting the outcome of the election.
And I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit.
When state executive officials refused to certify him the winner of states he lost, he applied more pressure. When state legislators refused to go back into session and appoint Trump electors, he amped up the pressure yet again. Anyone who got in the way of Donald Trump's continued hold on power after he lost the election was the subject of a dangerous and escalating campaign of pressure. This pressure campaign brought angry phone calls and texts, armed protests, intimidation, and all too often threats of violence and death. State legislators were singled out. So too were statewide elections officials. Even local elections workers, diligently doing their jobs, were accused of being criminals and had their lives turned upside down. As we will show, the president's supporters heard the former president's claims of fraud and the false allegations he made against state and local officials as a call to action. This pressure campaign against state and local officials spanned numerous contested states, as you will see in this video produced by the Select Committee.
My name is Josh Roselman. I'm an investigative counsel for the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Beginning in late November 2020, the president and his lawyers started appearing before state legislators, urging them to give their electoral votes to Trump, even though he lost the popular vote.
I represent President Trump along with Jenna Ellis, and this is our fourth or fifth hearing.
This election has to be turned around because we won Pennsylvania by a lot, and we won all of these swing states by a lot.
This was a strategy with both practical and legal elements. The Select Committee has obtained an email from just 2 days after the election in which a Trump campaign lawyer named Cleta Mitchell asked another Trump lawyer, John Eastman, to write a memo justifying the idea.
When do you remember this coming up as an option in the post-election period for the first time?
Right after the election.
Eastman prepared a memo attempting to justify this strategy, which was circulated to the Trump White House, Rudy Giuliani's legal team, and state legislators around the country. And he appeared before the Georgia State Legislature to advocate for it publicly.
You could also do what the Florida legislature was prepared to do, which is to adopt a slate of electors yourselves. And when you add in the mix of the significant statistical anomalies and sworn affidavits and video evidence of outright election fraud, I don't think it's just your authority to do that, but quite frankly, I think you have a duty to do that, to protect the integrity of the election here in Georgia.
But Republican officials in several states released public statements recognizing that President Trump's proposal was unlawful. For instance, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp called the proposal unconstitutional, while Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers wrote that the idea would undermine the rule of law. The pressure campaign to get state legislators to go along with the scheme intensified when President Trump invited delegations from Michigan and Pennsylvania to the White House.
Either you or Speaker Chatfield.
I believe we did. Whether or not it was those exact words or not.
Nevertheless, the pressure continued. The next day, President Trump tweeted, quote, "Hopefully the courts and/or legislatures will have the courage to do what has to be done to maintain the integrity of our elections and the United States of America itself. The world is watching." He posted multiple messages on Facebook listing the contact information for state officials and urging his supporters to contact them to, quote, "demand a vote on decertification." In one of those posts, President Trump disclosed Mike Shirkey's personal phone number to his millions of followers.
All I remember is receiving just shy of 4,000 text messages over a short period of time, calling to take action.
The state pressure campaign and the danger it posed to state officials and to state capitals around the nation was a dangerous precursor to the violence we saw on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. Today you will hear from Rusty Bowers, the Republican Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives. He will tell us about his conversations with the President, with Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, and what the President's team asked of him and how his oath of office would not permit it. You will then hear from Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State of Georgia, who Trump directed to, quote, find 11,780 votes that did not exist, but just the exact number of votes needed to overtake Joe Biden. You will also hear from Gabriel Sterling, the chief operating officer, his chief operating officer, about the spurious claims of fraud in the elections in Georgia, and who, responding to a cascading set of threats to his elections team, warned the president to stop, that someone was going to get killed. And you will hear from Wandrea Shea Moss, a former local elections worker in Fulton County, Georgia, about how all of the lies about the election impacted the lives of real people who administer our elections and still do. You will hear what they experienced when the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, sought to cling to power after being voted out of office by the American people. The system held, but barely. And the system held because people of courage, Republicans and Democrats, like the witnesses you will hear today, put their oath to the country and Constitution above any other consideration. They did their jobs, as we must do ours.
We're joined today by a distinguished legislator from Arizona, Rusty Bowers, who's a Republican Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives. Mr. Bowers was first elected to the state legislature in 1993 and has served as Speaker since 2019. Welcome, Speaker Bowers. Brad Raffensperger is the 29th Secretary of State of Georgia, serving in this role since 2019. As an elected official and a Republican, Secretary Raffensperger is responsible for supervising elections in Georgia and maintaining the state's public records. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Gabriel Sterling is the Chief Operating Officer in the Georgia Secretary of State's office. Mr. Sterling was the statewide voting systems implementation manager for the 2020 election in Georgia, responsible for leading the Secretary of State's response to the COVID pandemic and rolling out modernized voting equipment.
But there were parts of it that are true, but there are parts that are not, sir.
And the part that I read you, is that false?
Anywhere, anyone, anytime has said that I said the election was rigged, that would not be true.
And when the former president in his statement today claimed that you told him that he won Arizona, is that also false?
That is also false.
Mr. Bowers, I understand that after the election, and I don't know whether this is the conversation the former president is referring to, but after the election, you received a phone call from President Trump and Rudy Giuliani in which they discussed the result of the presidential election in Arizona. If you would, tell us about that call and whether the former president or Mr. Giuliani raised allegations of election fraud.
Thank you. My wife and I had returned from attending our church meetings. It was on a Sunday. And we were still in the driveway, and I had received a call from a colleague telling me that the White House was trying to get in touch with her and I, and that she said, please, if you get a call, let's try to take this together.
And getting back to the ask in that phone call that preceded this meeting, he wanted you to have the legislature dismiss the Biden electors and replace them with Trump electors on the basis of these theories of fraud?
He did not say it in those exact words, but he did say that Arizona law, according to what he understood, that would be allowed, and that we needed to come into session to take care of that, which initiated a discussion about, again, what I can legally and not legally do, and I can't go into session in Arizona unilaterally or on my sole prerogative.
In this meeting or at any other later time, did anyone provide you with evidence of election fraud sufficient to affect the outcome of the presidential election in Arizona?
No one provided me ever such evidence.
But in your view, what he was asking you to do would have violated your oath to the Constitution, both the United States Constitution and the Constitution of the state of Arizona?
Yes, sir.
Did you also receive a call from U.S. Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona on the morning of January 6th?
I did.
And what did Mr. Biggs ask you to do?
I believe that was the day that the vote was occurring to each state to have certification, or to declare the certification of the electors. And he asked if I would sign on both to a letter that had been sent from my state and or that I would support the decertification of the electors. And I said I would not.
Mr. Speaker, on December 4th, 2020, shortly after your meeting with Rudy Giuliani and other allies of President Trump, you released a statement publicly addressing, quote, calls for the legislature to overturn the 2020 certified election results. The statement is very straightforward in explaining the, quote, breathtaking request, unquote, made by representatives of President Trump. Quote, that the Arizona legislature overturn the certified results of last month's election and deliver the state's electoral college votes to President Trump, unquote. Why did you believe, as you wrote in this statement, that the rule of law forbid you from doing what President Trump and his allies wanted you to do?
Representative, I'm sorry, I should be saying, Mr. Chairman, Representative Schiff, there's two sides to the answer, and I am not allowed to walk or act beyond my authority. If I'm not specifically authorized as a legislator, as a legislature, then I cannot act to the point of calling us into session. Some say that just a few legislators have plenary authority, and that has come as part of all of this discussion, I'll call it. But so to not have authority and be forbidden to act beyond my authority on both counts, I am not authorized to take such action, and that would deny my oath.
In your statement, you included excerpts from President Ronald Reagan's inaugural address in 1981. The newly inaugurated president told the country, quote, the orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle.
the fact that we allow an election, support an election, and stand behind the election, even in the past when there have been serious questions about the election, and then move on without disturbance and with acceptance that we choose to follow the outcome of the will of the people. That will, it means a lot to me, and I know it meant a lot to him, and so we included.
Thank you, Speaker Bowers. I now want to look even more deeply at the fake electors scheme. Every 4 years, citizens from all over the United States go to the polls to elect their president. Under our Constitution, when we cast our votes for president, we are actually voting to send electors pledged to our preferred candidate to the Electoral College. In December, the electors in each state meet, cast their votes, and send those votes to Washington. There is only one legitimate slate of electors from each state. On the 6th day of January, Congress meets in a joint session to count those votes, and the winner of the Electoral College vote becomes the president. In this next segment, you'll hear how President Trump and his campaign were directly involved in advancing and coordinating the plot to replace legitimate Biden electors with fake electors not chosen by the voters. You'll hear how this campaign convinced these fake electors to cast and submit their votes through fake certificates, telling them that their votes would only be used in the event that President Trump won his legal challenges. Yet when the president lost those legal challenges, when courts rejected them as frivolous and without merit, the fake elector scheme continued. At this point, President Trump's own lawyers, so-called Team Normal, walked away rather than participate in the plan. And his own White House counsel's office said that the plan was not legally sound. Let's play the following video produced by the Select Committee.
My name is Casey Lucier. I'm an investigative counsel for the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. On November 18th, a lawyer working with the Trump campaign named Kenneth Chesebro wrote a memo arguing that the Trump campaign should organize its own electors in the swing states that President Trump had lost. The Select Committee received testimony that those close to President Trump began planning to organize fake electors for Trump in states that Biden won in the weeks after the election.
Who do you remember being involved in those early discussions around the Thanksgiving time regarding having alternate electors meet?
Mr. Giuliani, several of Mr. Giuliani's associates, Mr. Meadows, members of Congress, although it's difficult to distinguish if the members I'm thinking of were involved during Thanksgiving or if they were involved as we...
Essentially, he turned the call over to Mr. Eastman, who then proceeded to talk about the importance of the RNC helping the campaign gather these contingent electors in case any of the legal challenges that were ongoing changed the result of any of the states. I think more just helping them reach out and assemble them. But my understanding is the campaign did take the lead, and we just were helping them in that role.
As President Trump and his supporters continued to lose lawsuits, some campaign lawyers became convinced that convening electors in states that Trump lost was no longer appropriate.
I just remember I either replied or called somebody saying, unless we have litigation pending that's like in these states, like, I don't think this is appropriate, or, this isn't the right thing to do.
I'm angry because I think in a sense, no one really cared if people were potentially putting themselves in jeopardy.
Would you have not wanted to participate in this any further as well?
I absolutely would not have. Had I known that the three main lawyers for the campaign that I've spoken to in the past and were leading up were not on board.
I was told that these would only count if a court ruled in our favor. So that would have been using our electors, it would have been using our electors in ways that we weren't told about, and we wouldn't have supported.
Documents obtained by the Select Committee indicate that instructions were given to the electors in several states that they needed to cast their ballots in complete secrecy. Because this scheme involved fake electors, those participating in certain states had no way to comply with state election laws, like where the electors were supposed to meet. One group of fake electors even considered hiding overnight to ensure that they could access the state capitol, as required in Michigan.
Did Mr. Norton say who he was working with at all on this effort to have electors meet?
He said he was working with the president's campaign. He told me that the Michigan Republican electors were planning to meet in the Capitol and hide overnight so that they could fulfill the role of casting their vote in per law in the Michigan chambers. And I told him in no uncertain terms that that was insane and inappropriate.
In one state, the fake electors even asked for a promise that the campaign would pay their legal fees if they got sued or charged with a crime. Ultimately, fake electors did meet on December 14th, 2020 in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Nevada, and Wisconsin. At the request of the Trump campaign, the electors from these battleground states signed documents falsely asserting that they were the, quote, duly elected electors from their state, and submitted them to the National Archives and to Vice President Pence in his capacity as President of the Senate. Here is what some of the fake elector certificates look like as compared to the real ones. But these ballots had no legal effect. In an email produced to the Select Committee, Dr. Eastman told a Trump campaign representative that it did not matter that the electors had not been approved by a state authority. Quote, the fact that we have multiple slates of electors demonstrates the uncertainty of either. That should be enough. He urged that Pence act boldly and be challenged. Documents produced to the Select Committee show that the Trump campaign took steps to ensure that the physical copies of the fake electors' electoral votes from 2 states were delivered to Washington for January 6th. Text messages exchanged between Republican Party officials in Wisconsin show that on January 4th, the Trump campaign asked for someone to fly their fake electors' documents to Washington. A staffer for Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson texted a staffer for Vice President Pence just minutes before the beginning of the joint session. This staffer stated that Senator Johnson wished to hand-deliver to the vice president the fake electors' votes from Michigan and Wisconsin. The vice president's aide unambiguously instructed them not to deliver the fake votes to the vice president. Even though the fake elector slates were transmitted to Congress and the executive branch, the vice president held firm in his position that his role was to count lawfully submitted electoral votes.
Joseph R. Biden Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 306 votes. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 232 votes.
Which is what he did when the joint session resumed on January 6th after the attack on the Capitol.
538.
What we just heard in that video was an aide to the White House Chief of Staff telling this committee that the White House counsel's office felt that this fake electors plan was not legally sound. Nevertheless, the Trump campaign went forward with the scheme anyway.
It is the new pattern, or a pattern in our lives, to worry what will happen on Saturdays, because we have various groups come by and they have had video panel trucks with videos of me proclaiming me to be a pedophile and a pervert and a corrupt and politician, and blaring loudspeakers in my neighborhood and leaving literature both on my property but arguing and threatening with neighbors and with myself. I don't know if I should name groups, but there was one gentleman that had the 3 bars on his chest, and he had a pistol and was threatening my neighbor, not with the pistol, but just vocally. When I saw the gun, I knew I had to get close. And at the same time, on some of these, we had a daughter who was gravely ill, who was upset by what was happening outside. And my wife, that was a valiant person, very, very strong, quiet, very strong woman. So it was disturbing. It was disturbing.
Is it fair to say that you wanted President Trump to win the 2020 election?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Secretary, many witnesses have told the Select Committee that Election Day, November 3rd, 2020, was a largely uneventful day in their home states. In spite of the challenges of conducting an election during a pandemic, you wrote in the Washington Post that the election was, quote, successful. Tell us, what was your impression of how Election Day had proceeded in Georgia?
On Election Day in November, our election went remarkably smooth.
Secretary Raffensperger, did Joe Biden win the 2020 presidential election in Georgia, and by what margin?
President Biden carried the state of Georgia by approximately 12,000 votes.
And Mr. Secretary, as I understand it, your office took several steps to ensure the accuracy of the vote count in Georgia, reviewing the vote count in at least 3 different ways. These steps included a machine recount, a forensic audit, and a full hand recount of every one of the 5 million ballots cast. Did these efforts, including a recount of literally every ballot cast in the state of Georgia, confirm the result?
Yes, they did. We counted the ballots where the first tabulation would be scanned. Then when we did our 100% hand audit of the all 5 million ballots in the state of Georgia, all cast in place, all absentee ballots, they were all hand recounted. They came remarkably close to the first count. And then upon the election being certified, President Trump, because he was within 0.5%, could ask for a recount. And then we recounted them again through the scanners, and we got remarkably the same count. 3 counts, all remarkably close, which showed that President Trump did come up short.
Nevertheless, as you will see, the president and his allies began making numerous false allegations of voter fraud. False allegations that you and Mr. Sterling, among others, had to address. Mr. Sterling, thank you also for being here today. Following the 2020 election, in addition to your normal duties, I understand that you became a spokesperson to try to combat disinformation about the election and the danger it was creating for elections officials, among others. In a December 1 press conference, you addressed some of your remarks directly to President Trump. Let's take a look at what you said that day.
Mr. President, it looks like you likely lost the state of Georgia. We're investigating. There's always a possibility. I get it. And you have the rights to go through the courts. What you don't have the ability to do, and you need to step up and say this, is stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence. Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to get shot. Someone's going to get killed. And it's not right. It's not right.
Nevertheless, the very next day, on December 2nd, President Trump released a lengthy video again making false claims of election fraud in Georgia. Let's take a look at what he said this time.
They found thousands and thousands of votes that were out of whack, all against me.
In fact, the day after Donald Trump released that video, so now we're talking just 2 days after the emotional warning that you gave that someone's going to get killed, representatives of President Trump appeared in Georgia, including Rudy Giuliani, and launched a new conspiracy theory that would take on a life of its own and threaten the lives of several innocent election workers. This story falsely alleges that sometime during election night, election workers at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia, kicked out poll observers. After the observers left, the story goes, these workers pulled so-called suitcases of ballots from under a table and ran those ballots through counting machines multiple times. Completely without evidence, President Trump and his allies claimed that these suitcases contained as many as 18,000 ballots, all for Joe Biden. None of this was true. But Rudy Giuliani appeared before the Georgia State Senate and played a surveillance video from State Farm Arena, falsely claiming that it showed this conspiracy taking place. Here's a sample of what Mr. Giuliani had to say during that hearing.
And when you look at what you saw on the video, which to me was a smoking gun, powerful smoking gun, well, I don't have to be a genius to figure out what happened. And I don't have to be a genius to figure out that those votes are not legitimate votes.
Did the investigators in your office review the entire surveillance tape from the State Farm Arena on election night?
They actually reviewed approximately 48 hours going over the time period where action was taking place at the counting center at State Farm Arena.
And what did the tape actually show?
Depending on which time you want to start, because as was mentioned, this conspiracy theory took on a life of its own, where they conflated a water main break that wasn't a water main break and throwing observers out and a series of other things. What it actually showed was Fulton County election workers engaging in normal ballot processing. One of the specific things, one of the things that was very frustrating was the so-called suitcases of ballots from under the table. If you watch the entirety of the video, you saw that these were election workers who were under the impression they were going to get to go home around 10:30. People are putting on their coats. They're putting ballots that are prepared to be scanned into ballot carriers that are then sealed with tamper-proof seals so that they're not messed with. It's an interesting thing because you watch there's 4 screens of the video, and as you're watching it, you can see the election monitors in the corner with the press as they're taking these ballot carriers and putting them under the table. You see it there. One of the other hidden ones, if you looked at the actual tape, was on the outside of the table, just from the camera angle. You couldn't see it originally. And this goes under the no good deed goes unpunished. We were told, we were at GEMA, as the secretary pointed out, and we were told that it looked like they were shutting down the Fulton County counting. The secretary expressed some displeasure at that because we wanted to everybody keep counting so we could get to the results and know what was happening. So our elections director called their elections director, who was at another location because this was election day. There was 2 different places where ballot things were being done by the Fulton County office. So he called the elections director of Fulton, then called Ralph Jones, who was at the State Farm Arena, and said, "What the heck are you doing? Go ahead and stay." And by doing the hand tally, we saw 2 specific numbers that were met. The hand tally got us to a 0.1053% off of the total votes cast and 0.0099% on the margin, which is essentially dead on accurate. Most academic studies say on a hand tally you'll have between 1% and 2%, but because we use ballot marking devices where it's very clear what the voter intended, it made it a lot easier for us to conduct that hand count and show that none of that was true.
Now, I understand that when you reviewed these tapes and did the analysis, it disproved this conspiracy theory. But you still had to take a lot of steps to try to make sure the public knew the truth about these allegations. And you did frequent briefings for the press. Let's take a look at one of those press briefings, Mr. Sterling, that you held on December 7th to make the point that you just did today.
Move on to what I'm going to call Disinformation Monday. Out of the gate, many of y'all saw the videotape from State Farm Arena. I spent hours with our post-certified investigators, Justin Gray from WSB, spent hours with us going over this video to explain to people that what you saw, the secret suitcases with magic ballots, were actually ballots that had been packed into those absentee ballot carriers by the workers in plain view of the monitors and the press. And what's really frustrating is the president's attorneys had this same videotape. They saw the exact same things the rest of us could see, and they chose to mislead state senators and the public about what was on that video. I'm quite sure that they will not characterize the video if they try to enter into evidence, because that is the kind of thing that could lead to sanctions, because it's obviously untrue. And our job, from our point of view, is to get the facts out, do our job, tell the truth, follow the Constitution, follow the law, and defend the institutions, and the institutions held.
Let's take a look at what you were competing with. This is the former president speaking in Georgia on December 5th.
Evidence of fraud is overwhelming, and again, I'm going to ask you to look up at that very, very powerful and very expensive screen.
Hidden cases of possible ballots are rolled out from under a table. 4 people under a cloud of suspicion.
So, if you just take the crime of what those Democrat workers were doing, and by the way, there was no water main break. You know, they said there was no water. That's 10 times more than I need to win this state. 10 times more.
Senior Department of Justice officials, including his own attorney general, told the president that these allegations were not true. President Trump kept promoting these lies and putting pressure on state officials to accept them. On January 2nd, the president had a lengthy telephone conversation with Secretary Raffensperger. Prior to the president's call, though, I want to share a bit of important context. First, the White House, including the former president's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, repeatedly called or texted the secretary's office some 18 times in order to set up this call. They were quite persistent. Second, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows took the extraordinary step of showing up at a signature audit site in Georgia, where he met with Secretary Raffensperger's chief investigator, Francis Watson, who was supervising that audit process. Behind me is a photograph from that visit. Third, the day after Meadows' Georgia visit, he set up a call between President Trump and Francis Watson. On the call between President Trump and Georgia investigator Francis Watson, the former president continued to push the false claim that he'd won the state of Georgia. It was clear at the time of this call that the former president had his sights set on January 6th. Listen to this portion when he told Francis Watson about a very important date.
Do you think they'll be working after Christmas and keep it going fast? Because, we have that date of the 6th, which is a very important date.
That important date, of course, was the joint session of Congress, where Georgia's electoral votes would be counted for Joe Biden. A little over a week after this call to Francis Watson, the president was finally able to speak with you, Secretary Raffensperger. Bear in mind, as we discuss this call today, that by this point in time, early January, the election in Georgia had already been certified. But perhaps more important, the President of the United States had already been told repeatedly by his own top Justice Department officials that the claims he was about to make to you about massive fraud in Georgia were completely false. Mr. Secretary, the call between you and the President lasted 67 minutes, over an hour. We obviously can't listen to the entire recording here today, although it is available on the Select Committee's website. But we'll listen to selected excerpts of it now so that we can get your insights. Let's begin with the President raising the thoroughly debunked allegations of suitcases of ballots. The President references suitcases or trunks.
They're standard ballot carriers that allow for seals to be put on them so they're tamper-proof.
And finally, the President claims that there was a minimum of 18,000 ballots somehow smuggled in, all for Biden. I take it, gentlemen, that was also categorically false?
There's no physical way he can know who those ballots were for, but secondarily, we had Fulton County for years has been an issue in our state when it comes to elections.
You told the President you would send him a link from WSB, which I understand is a local television station that had a unedited video from the State Farm Arena. But the President wasn't interested in that. He said he had a much better link. Mr. Secretary, at the time that you were on the call with the President, as we have shown, both the FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation have proven these claims to be nonsense. And you told him about these investigations on the phone. But the President didn't stop at insinuating that law enforcement officers were either dishonest or incompetent. He went on to suggest that you could be subject to criminal liability for your role in the matter. Before I play that portion of the conversation, I'd like to show you something that the President retweeted a couple weeks before your call with him. Here's the President retweeting a post from one of his allies, a lawyer who was later sanctioned by a judge in Michigan for making false claims of election fraud. Let's take a look at that tweet. The tweet read, quote, "President Trump, @RealDonaldTrump, is a genuinely good man. He does not really like to fire people. I bet he dislikes putting people in jail, especially, quote unquote, Republicans. He gave @Brian Kemp, Georgia, and @Georgia Secretary of State every chance to get it right. They refused. They will soon be going to jail."
And that's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk.
Secretary Raffensperger, after making a false claim about shredding of ballots, the President suggested that you may be committing a crime by not going along with his claims of election fraud. And after suggesting that you might have criminal exposure, President Trump makes his most explicit ask of the call. Let's play a part of that conversation.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Mr. Secretary, was the President here asking you for exactly what he wanted? One more vote than his opponent.
What I knew is that we didn't have any votes to find.
Well, I know the events that we're here to talk about today are incredibly difficult to relive. Your proud service as an election worker took a dramatic turn on the day that Rudy Giuliani publicized a video of you and your mother counting ballots on election night. President Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and others claimed on the basis of this video that you and your mother were somehow involved in a plot to kick out observers, bring suitcases of false ballots for Biden into the arena, and then run them through the machines multiple times. None of that was true, was it?
None of it.
I'd like to show you some of the statements that Rudy Giuliani made in a second hearing before the Georgia state legislators, a week after that video clip from State Farm Arena was first circulated by Mr. Giuliani and President Trump. I want to advise viewers that these statements are completely false and also deeply disturbing.
Tape earlier in the day of Ruby Freeman and Shay Freeman Moss and one other gentleman quite obviously, surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine. I mean, it's obvious to anyone who's a criminal investigator or prosecutor, they are engaged in surreptitious illegal activity, again, that day. And that's a week ago, and they're still walking around Georgia lying. They should have been questioned already. Their places of work, their homes should have been searched for evidence of ballots, for evidence of USB ports, for evidence of voter fraud.
And were there social media posts that they showed you responding to those false claims?
Well, when I saw the video, of course, the first thing that I said was like, why? Why are they doing this? What's going on? And once again, it made me just feel so horrible.
In addition to the personal impact this experience has had on you and your family, one of the things that I find most disturbing is how these lies discourage longtime election workers from continuing to do this important work. Tell us, if you would, of the other election workers shown in that State Farm Arena video and their supervisors. How many are still election workers in Fulton County?
There is no permanent election worker or supervisor in that video that's still there.
And did you end up leaving your position as well?
Yes, I left.
Ms. Moss, I want to thank you for coming in to speak with us and to thank you for your service to our democracy. What we have just played is a truly horrible and appalling sample, but just a sample of the things that were said about you and your mother following the election. I want to say how very sorry I think we all are for what you've gone through, and tragically, you're not alone.
I want to thank you for sharing with us the very troubling story of what you and your mother experienced. The harassment of election workers like you simply for doing your duty as public servants poses a threat to our democratic process. Your testimony is an important contribution to the work of our committee and serves as a reminder to all of us that the safety of local election officials is vital to ensuring that our elections are always free and fair. I want to thank our witness for joining us today. People answer the call to public service in such different ways. Some run for office. Some volunteer to make sure their neighbors can get to their voting locations. Some work at polling sites to help election day go smoothly. Some look into problems to guarantee our elections are secure and accurate, just to name a few. As I mentioned at the start of this hearing, when we talk about our democratic institutions, we're talking about these individuals and many others who do these jobs across the country. They represent the backbone of our democracy at its most important moments, when the citizens cast their votes and when those votes are counted. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.